Hello, welcome to another screencast where this time we'll be discussing nervous system overview and membrane potential, but I think we're going to split this into at least 3 different screencasts here. So by the end of this one, hopefully you'll be able to describe the overall structure and function of nervous systems, and we're going to specifically be talking about here vertebrate nervous systems, right? And then the structure and function of a neuron as well as a Schwann cell, right? And so we'll deal with the membrane potential stuff in another screencast. So we've been talking about cells communicating over long distances via hormones, and this is an example of the endocrine system, right? And we have several examples and screencasts there. But now this time we're talking sort of about more local communication, where the cells that are communicating with one another are really closely together, and we want to focus here on the synaptic signaling, right? And the best example we have of this, of course, is nerve signals, or nerve cells that are also known as neurons. Now, many of you have had psychology and/or anatomy and physiology, so this should be a little bit of a review. If you haven't, then this is all new to you, and you're probably going to want to pause and go back and maybe do some extra reading outside to fill in some of the gaps in your knowledge here. So we see that we have one neuron here, and then here's a second neuron down here, and they are communicating with each other via these neurotransmitters that are diffusing across the synapse, right, or the gap. And so these neurotransmitters are chemical messengers, right? These are chemical signals similar to hormones, but not defined as hormone because they are local, just between the two cells. These neurotransmitters are not generally released into the bloodstream. Okay, so let's talk here about nervous systems in general and how they are functioning. So the nervous system regulates the organismal activities in response to stimuli, right? And so this is just reading the title up here. So all these nervous systems have some sort of sensory receptor here, right? And then that detecting some sort of signal or some sort of stimulus, right? In this case, we're dealing with light waves entering the eye, so that would be a stimulus. Then there's this sensory input here, which is in the form of something that we are going to be referring to as action potentials. Right? Action potentials that are transmitted or electrical impulses along neurons. This is all happening in the peripheral nervous system, or the PNS. And then there's this integration part here where the information comes in and then it is also processed. Right? And again, this information now was in the form of light waves, and now the information is in form of an action potential, and that processing of that information happens here in the central nervous system of the organism. There's information, there's like sort of a decision that needs to be made if there's some sort of response. That response then, so this is the integration of the processing is here in the central nervous system. There's then this motor output, which again is also in the form of action potentials that are then transmitted to some sort of effector organ here, right? And then this effector, right, you see the effects of whatever that information was that was processed in the central nervous system, right? And so this is also known as sometimes motor output. And so this is the general basic structure and functioning of vertebrate nervous systems. Here we see a little bit more detailed structure, but again, a chance to review those basic processes here. So vertebrate nervous systems consist of a central nervous system for processing and a peripheral nervous system for sensing and responding. So again, over here is our central nervous system, and this is going to be for processing. And I realize that that's a pretty general term at the moment, but it's basically going to be receiving action potentials, right, and then sending action potentials out. Right? So the two structures are the brain and the spinal cord. These are both considered central nervous system structures. The peripheral nervous system over here is responsible for detecting stimuli, right, and then for responding to those stimuli. Right? And so this is sending, so not only detecting, but sending action potentials. And then responding is conveying the action potentials away from the central nervous system in order to elicit some sort of response to that. And so the structures that we have there are generally called nerves. And so we have cranial nerves that come off of the brain, and we see those here in yellow. And then we have spinal nerves that are coming off of the spinal cord, and we see those here in yellow. But again, the peripheral nervous system structures are known as nerves. Also, if you're in psychology or anatomy and physiology, you'll be familiar with this term ganglia, which are also peripheral nervous system structures, but we're not going to go into that detail here. So suffice to say that nerves are peripheral nervous system structures, sending action potentials, conducting action potentials to and away from the central nervous system, which is processing those action potentials. So the cells that are actually conducting the action potentials are called neurons. And so here's a neuron. It is a cell. And so because it's a cell, it will have, of course, this cell body. We have identified a nucleus to the cell here. And the border of this cell, you notice that this cell is an animal cell, so it's not this classic animal cell. Like it's a circle, and here's the nucleus, right? No, no, no. This is a cell, but it has a very specific structure to it. So we see these branches of the cell right here, and these branches are referred to as dendrites. Right? So the dendrites are extensions of the cell, extensions of the cytoplasm. Right? If we were to zoom in right here, we would see a membrane that is going to separate the outside of the cell from the inside of the cell. All the yellow would be the cytoplasm of that cell. Then we see this long extension here that's known as an axon. So again, this is the axon in yellow, right? Here and here and here. Right? And then that cell ends in these axon terminals. Right? And you notice that they are branching as well. And so this axon, again, is an extension of this cell. So this cell has, this neuron has branching effects to it. And again, branching would indicate sort of an increased surface area to volume ratio. Right? And if we're increasing the surface area, this is going to play a key role in understanding the functioning of these neurons as well. I want to just note here that you maybe, if you've had psychology or anatomy and physiology, you've heard of Schwann cells here and the node of Ranvier or Ranvier. These Schwann cells are not neurons. These are supporting cells that are helping to conduct that action potential much more rapidly. These Schwann cells are not neurons. They will secrete a fatty substance called myelin that helps to conduct the action potential extra specially fast, right? So there's the structure of a neuron, dendrite, cell body, axon. And incidentally, before we leave this, you might see these black arrows here. These arrows represent the direction that an action potential is conducted. Right? So a neuron is a specialized cell for conducting action potentials. Direction of action potential conduction. Right? So this information goes from dendrite to cell body to axon. Right? So again, here are arrows here and here, right? And here. So we're going to be generating action potentials at the dendrite and then conveying them down the axon. Again, I'll say that again. You're going to be generating action potentials at the dendrites and conveying them through the cell body down the axon. There are other cells involved with these vertebrate nervous systems, and these are supporting cells. And again, in anatomy and physiology, you have seen these astrocytes and microglial cells and ependymal cells. It came up in class about this oligodendrocyte. So these oligodendrocytes are producing myelin sheaths, and these oligodendrocytes are like Schwann cells, but these are in the central nervous system only. Right? So don't worry about the astrocytes and microglial cells, ependymal cells, etc. But the oligodendrocytes are like the Schwann cells, and here we see a Schwann cell again. Right? And so the, what do we have this labeled here? Here's the Schwann cell with the myelin sheath. And so again, there's the Schwann cell, but these Schwann cells are in neurons that are in the peripheral nervous system. Okay? So neuron structure, neuron function, conducting action potentials. Let's put this all together here again. So vertebrate nervous systems consist of the central nervous system. So here we've taken the spinal cord and we've cut a transverse or a cross section through that. And we've identified here then that is, of course, central nervous system structure. And then a nerve, or neurons that are in the peripheral nervous system. Here we have sensory nerves over here. So this is a sensory neuron. We notice that there are dendrites. Right? Here's the cell body. And then this is one very long axon. This central process is the axon. So here we can identify dendrites, cell bodies, axons. And here's the direction of the action potential, right, being transmitted from some sort of receptor, right, generating action potential, sending it to the central nervous system. This would be the processing aspect of this here. Right? So again, this is going to be processing. And then there is going to be action potentials that are transmitted down this neuron, right? And so this motor neuron here, this would be the dendrites and the cell bodies. And then this would be the long axon, right? And then here are the axon terminals, right, that are going to go to the effector glands or muscles, right, and to get some sort of response from that. Right? So some people sometimes confuse neuron and nerve. A nerve is a peripheral nervous system structure, and a nerve is a whole collection of neurons. Right? And so this whole thing here is the nerve. Right? And when we dissect this apart, we see that this is the axon of one neuron. Right? And so a nerve is a whole collection of axons in the peripheral nervous system. So this is many cells, many cells here bundled together make up a nerve. So the individual cell is a neuron. When we're going to be talking about communication, we're going to be talking about communication between two of those neurons, right? So hopefully now you're able to describe the overall structure and function of vertebrate nervous systems, as well as the structure of a neuron and the structure of the Schwann cell and what it's producing. Okay, thanks for listening. Bring your questions to class.